The notion of home in video games is a weird one. My earliest memories of such are the likes of Banjo's cottage at the foot of Spiral Mountain and Link's treehouse in Kokiri Village. These were the first instances for me where home was more than a vaguely hinted at concept, but a tangible in-game environment with the accoutrements of a space one could find comfort in. Beds and couches, a table to eat at or a pot to cook in, pictures of loved ones and books to read, tools for work, actual interior design, purposeful placement of assets crafted by teams of digital artists, with the intent of not only making the world look more real and pretty, but to tell a story that only environmental design can. Through the years, these artists have benefited from the advent of new technology, allowing them to speak in greater detail and fidelity. The evolution of the Normandy is a prime example of such, within the metallic hull of a cutting-edge spacecraft where Commander Shepard spends their time in between missions reading emails, feeding their fish, playing chess, plotting their next mission, and of course developing friendships and romances with the crew. That's the home I think most fondly of, even a decade after its construction. There is no place in the entire Milky Way more integral to the series than that which you pace back and forth through for dozens and dozens of hours. There is no place like the Normandy. When looking at the SR1, I noticed two things. Well, three if we include listening in all this, as it's the only time the ship has a dedicated OST. Visually though, it's rather dimly lit and quite sparse. The former being less of an issue for me and actually rather key to keeping a consistent visual tone with the rest of the game. The latter, well, also quite telling but in a less flattering way. I say this with a lot of love in my heart as I feel the sparseness and jank are rather apt to the first game's appeal, even if such is a deterrent for many. Those barren planets are so lifeless and drab, fitting into the more hard sci-fi style not as present in the sequels. Mass Effect 1 is a game trying to figure itself out, and that has always been its biggest appeal for me. Aboard the Normandy, so much of the visual identity of the trilogy is established. For example, the numerous lens flares and usage of stark blues, oranges, and reds for lighting. It gives it an 80s synth aesthetic, which is reflected in the musical tracks such as, well, the Normandy. The SR1 is rather oppressive, but that's exactly how it should feel as a military vessel heading into the far reaches of the Milky Way, where desperate decisions, tragedies that span the eons, and cosmic horror awaits. The materials making up the inner hull are largely a dark gray. Few windows look out into the stars or between rooms. Each section is cut off, isolated, unwelcoming. And again, very poorly lit, someone is going to trip and hurt themselves here. The SR1, despite being an iconic home, doesn't come with all the amenities you would expect. For starters, there are no crew quarters. There are these sleeper pods, but they strike me as more, well, sleeper pods. There is simply not enough of them, even if you assume the crew operates in the same way many military vessels do, where assigned bunkmates alternate shifts. Equally concerning is the horrid hygiene, not a shower, tub, faucet, or toilet in sight, so where does it all go? How does it smell in here? Why do I care about the Normandy not having any bathrooms? It doesn't affect gameplay. You wouldn't spend much time in these places. What's the point? To use an old game reviewer word, immersion. Environmental design is an underappreciated workhorse. For me, no matter the form, be it book, game, anime, or film, world design can make or break it all. So let's look at a specific part of the Normandy, the first deck, also known as the command deck. It's here you'll find the cockpit, airlock, communications room, and command center. Dividing the cockpit from the main area of the command deck is a hall whose design is meant to make the player feel powerful every time they step through. On either side aren't just stations manned by the crew, but stations sunk into the deck. This way, as Commander Shepard strides by, those below them in the chain of command are physically placed lower than them on screen. It reminds me quite a bit of the Imperial Star Destroyer bridge and the pits placed on either side of the walkway we often see characters like Darth Vader standing upon, although here it's less sinister. The galaxy map is a very similar setup. To access it, Shepard has to step up onto a raised platform, but this time in the center of the room, surrounded by the crew. Said platform reaching out into the stars, a galaxy at their fingertips, and a grand adventure awaiting. If you were to compare this to another iconic BioWare spaceship, such as the Ebon Hawk from the Knights of the Old Republic series, it too has a map where you can scroll around and see all the planets you can visit. But on the Hawk, it's just a little side panel in the cockpit. One makes you feel like a member of a small team bouncing around the galaxy going unnoticed to Sith eyes. The other a grand statement, an embodiment of the core thesis of not just choice-driven adventure, but that which plays with the trilogy's infatuation with the great men of history theory. Directly behind the galaxy map is a sectioned-off hall to the comms room. One more little touch to remind the player the role are the two guards posted outside. Here the team meets for important conversations, often to run down what just happened in the previous mission. Interestingly, while Shepard does have a seat during these conversations, they don't have a special one that highlights their command. It's a round table discussion of sorts. Oftentimes your squad, some of whom are not members of the Alliance military, will speak freely. This setup helps erase the lines of command or divides between the species as far as placing them in any sort of tiering. All of their voices matter and their ideas bump heads here, even if Shepard has the final say. I find this interesting given the Normandy's status as an Alliance vessel. Military protocol should supersede pretty much everything. Technically speaking, Navigator Presley is the second in command, but he doesn't sit in on these meetings. He's not anywhere as influential to Shepard as the recruitable members of the team. Yes, it's easiest to write this off as well. It's a BioWare game and companions matter most. That's fair. But I think it's important to note the origin of the Normandy itself. That it was cooperatively constructed between humans and Turians as a goodwill project of sorts between two species that had been at war not even 3 decades prior. Ultimately, the goal of Commander Shepard and the Normandy is to unite the people of the Milky Way. Military rigidity and the blatant racism that militaries often benefit from be damned. On the 2 lower decks, crew and engineering, is where you'll find all the squad mates and the usual BioWare chat 'em up happens. This is also largely where the sparseness and asset reuse happens. There are still bespoke pieces, but Shepard's cabin sure is rather Spartan. A lot of these spaces gesture at some sci-fi goodness, but unlike those unique and curious pods, so much of this is fairly generic. You got your table for table thing, some chairs to sit in, but the finer details just aren't there. No one's sitting down to eat, reading mail from home, or plugging away at something distinctly futuristic. There is little interaction too. I often think about what surrounds squad mates, where they're placed. Caden is just here, poking at an orange screen, and it really doesn't say anything about his character. Meanwhile, there are clever placements, such as Liara being tucked away in the storage closet / lab behind the medbay, looking down at a microscope in a room filled with scientific equipment. Makes sense given she's a scientist who has spent much of her time alone on dig sites, making the young Asari socially awkward. Or there's Tali down in the engine room. In one of the many conversations with her, Shepard learns Tali's people, the Quarians, live on a massive convoy of aging starships. When they come of age, Quarians go on a pilgrimage in order to learn of the galaxy and prove they won't be a burden on their resource-thin society. Many return with ships or materials to repair the patchwork vessels already in the fleet. Tali, though, as a tech expert, is helping the Normandy's chief engineer run and maintain one of the most advanced experimental engines in the galaxy. By doing so, she hopes to bring back knowledge that can help her people. There are more subtle placements in environmental details. For example, Rex is hanging out in the cargo hold. If you read a certain entry in the Codex, you'll learn that Krogan tend to get a little territorial on spaceflight. Being cramped in one of these smaller parts of the ship probably wouldn't help his rightfully angry temperament, so sticking to the most spacious room where folks can give him a wide berth when needed adds up. Or there is Garrus, who also can be found in the hold. He stands near the Mako, and while he's not its designated driver or anything, we know he has some tech skills and a military background, meaning maintenance on the tools the squad deploys in combat is understandably important to him. This becomes abundantly clear by Mass Effect 2. The Normandy SR-1 while still iconic, does greatly pale in comparison to what follows. While there are some little details I miss, such as the ship's VI notifying the crew when Shepard disembarks, ultimately, what comes next is far more special. After some big events, the Normandy is in need of a little remodeling in Mass Effect 2. The SR2 is simply put a rebirth. It's bigger and better in just about every way. It is also not Alliance property. It is not Spartan and pragmatic. It is, among many, one of the big improvements Mass Effect 2 makes over its predecessor, bringing what felt like an idea not fully formed to a beautifully crafted realization. Much of the core design remains the same. The command deck is familiar, if more spacious and well lit, a trend that continues throughout the entirety of the ship. The interior isn't a deep grayish blue accented by neon lights, it's a bright polished steel and silver. The most significant change to the CIC not being a structural one, but a personnel one. Yeoman Kelly Chambers serves as Shepard's assistant, letting them know when crew members need to talk, and if there's any mail. Whether it be communications from the A.L.I.S.O.N, old friends like Captain Anderson checking in, side quest, and mail enhancement scams, this is one of the many little touches that make the SR2 far more homey. Part of making a space comforting is to give it routines. Returning from a mission to wind down and regroup is made all the easier when the faces of the crew await, as well as a little blinking green light on the side of Shepard's computer, indicating they've got mail. Where the CIC really changes is past the map towards the stern. No longer are there mirroring sets of stairs leading down to the crew deck. Instead, there's an elevator, with it a regular old loading screen rather than one hidden in a protracted ride. The SR2 is a significantly larger ship, and with that increase in size comes new rooms, many of which are far more detailed and descriptive of those that inhabit them. A lab and a proper armory can now be found on the command deck, both with bespoke or at least not incredibly common assets. Unlike the previous armory, this one grows as you collect and research more weapons. The Solarian scientist, Dr. Morden Solis, can be found in the aforementioned lab. On the second deck, Miranda has inserted herself into the XO quarters, which is where the old captain quarters used to be, and it's looking a lot spiffier in here these days. There are plenty not so blatant or only briefly mentioned in dialogue. For example, on the second deck, there is a whole new hallway with a number of essential crew amenities, as well as a life support room. It's here you find Thane Krios. With the help of the Normandy's AI, a benefit of operating under Cerberus, who doesn't follow galactic laws which forbid the development of AI, Thane hangs out here as the air is fairly dry. His people, the Drell, come from a more arid world. This hallway also contains a crew quarters with beds, bathrooms with toilets, and showers. It's worth noting that the bathrooms are gendered, and if a female Shepard enters the men's room or vice versa, EDI will gently remind them where the proper bathroom is located. Obviously a very binary approach that reflects the equally binary character creation and customization of Shepard's gender. On the aft and starboard sides are recreational rooms, loaded with comfy seating, some sort of gaming chair, and a bar. Across Mass Effect 2, bars and clubs are incredibly common, and Shepard is able to drink themselves silly at each and every one. On the Normandy, it's a nice little roleplay location. I often have my Shepards come here after a hard mission, or when the stress of saving the galaxy gets to be a little much. There's also a terrific view of the great big emptiness of space, speckled with the faint light of distant stars. A great place for Shepard to gather themselves. This is exactly what Samara can be found doing. She's got a lot going on, what with her joining a death mission as she reaches the latter stages of her century-long lifespan, of which she has spent the past few hundred years as an Asari Justicar, detached from most emotional and societal entanglements as she tracks down her serial killer daughter. So yeah, staring out into space to gain some perspective is probably doing wonders for her stress levels. Now, in the main commons area, there is still a table for table things, but where Kaidan once stood is now a kitchen and a dedicated chef, who is also the maintenance guy and janitor. The SR2 is a more believable space, and it's not just because of the fantastic environmental details, but the more lively crew. Not only squad mates who now have more conversations compared to their SR1 counterparts, but the nameless ones too. You can overhear all sorts of chatter, step into the sleeping quarters, and each time two people discuss one of their families that lives out on Ferris Fields. With each visit, they become increasingly worried about their loved ones, wondering if the team Miranda sent to extract them made it in time, all the while being consoled by their friends. The engineering deck is by far the most changed. The layout in general is unrecognizable to what came before. Within the engine room stands Tally. Below the state-of-the-art drive core are some maintenance-looking areas where Jack has tossed down her cot. Like Liara in the SR1, Jack isn't all that sociable, though for less awkward and shy reasons and more the world hates me and I hate it back ones. Despite this being an understated area, I really love the lighting, and one of the moodiest shots in the entire trilogy happens here. Inaccessible in all but a tiny combat portion of the final mission is the loading deck. Yes, I refuse to say the actual name of that mission. You're not getting me again, YouTube algorithms. It's a shame this whole area isn't regularly available to walk through or talk to crewmates in, because I think it could have alleviated some of my issues in regards to set dressing. Yes, the labs look great. Garrus's new home and the main battery has tools scattered about that he could be using for his maintenance. The trouble is, quite a few places aren't all that descriptive. There's a good reason that a lot of these folks would be traveling light even before they sign up for a mission that they're repeatedly told they won't come back from. Still, people have possessions, mementos, things that bring them comfort. Things that remind them who they are. These are people who are dwelling on their past and yet they bring so little of it physically with them. There could have been some interesting conversations or environmental storytelling around this sort of stuff. Say Thane brought a drawing his son made before the relationship soured. It would have been interesting to have him discuss why, as someone with pretty much perfect memory, he would still carry a physical memento of his family. These objects don't have to be so dramatic or even directly addressed. Simply walking into the armory and seeing on the table Jacob stands next to a little half-finished wood carving with the appropriate tools strewn about, just to see who these people are when they're not saving the galaxy or dealing with deep personal trauma. Little things that make them whole. Which is where we come to the two DLC characters, Kasumi Goto and Zaid Masani. Zaid can be found down in the engineering deck, amongst the garbage disposal where he belongs. And it's also just this neat little thing to fiddle with. He has brought along all sorts of mementos from his time as a mercenary. One of the most beloved rifles he had to retire, the helmet of a Krogan warlord he killed, and so on. Kasumi brings a bunch of books, works of art she has both stolen and been gifted. Clicking on any of these objects in either room will prompt them to talk a little bit about themselves, their past, their relationships, careers, and passions outside of such. They feel like proper rooms. Now, game development is complicated. Maybe at some point they had intended to do something similar with the base squad mates but were unable to. And the trade-off here with Kasumi and Zaid is that neither has the traditional chat-em-up mechanics. There are conversations, but they're rather one-sided as Shepard has no dialogue options to choose from and there is no real advancement of relationships. Last but certainly not least is the best part of the entire ship. No longer does Commander Shepard sleep on 2-inch-thick twin beds pushed together in a dreary-looking room of militaristic oppression. Shep's got a cabin, one of luxury, one that suits my style of role-playing rather well. Over the course of the game you can fill it out a bit. I love the notion of the famous Commander Shepard always keeping their eye out for shops that sell fish, or stores that carry model kits, for them to build in the silence of their cabin as a means of easing stress. BioWare, please make all of these kits actually purchasable on your real store. There's a bunch of little things to poke at here, from a functional toilet and a mirror that properly reflects, which I love when games have those. There's a picture of Shepard's love interest from Mass Effect 1 that will be placed face down if you start a relationship with someone other than them. There is even a pet gerbil I'm pretty sure is voiced by one of the developers. The Normandy SR2, in a lot of ways, is part of the reason I grew to love the Mass Effect series. While my issues with the second installment are well documented, so much of the environmental design both on the numerous planets and space stations you visit, to the place you call home in between those adventures is key to the world building Mass Effect is so beloved for. With the events of Mass Effect 2's Arrival DLC, the Normandy SR2 falls back into Alliance hands, while also removing Shepard as its commander. In order to get up to snuff for the looming war with the Reapers, it receives some heavy retrofitting, with the intention of making it Anderson's mobile command base. Once more though, Shepard is given the Normandy and off they go to save the Milky Way. The Normandy is still in the midst of retrofits though. Wires trailing across the ground, unfinished walls. This ship, like the Galaxy, isn't ready for the Reapers. This is the least it physically changes in terms of the general blueprint. Despite being a military vessel once more, either through a lack of time or a realization that beds, toilets, and a bar are pretty rad, there aren't a ton of new rooms. The first, third, and fourth decks largely remain the same, where the differences lie are on the back half of the command deck and the fact that the cargo hold is now accessible. Where the armory lab and comms room once stood has been gutted and reshaped into a more secure boardroom that leads into a war room and a new communications hub. There is only one way in or out. In order to access this area, you have to step through a security checkpoint, which I imagine is hiding a load. Speaking of, you might notice there are fewer internal windows, and I suspect this is because the way loading works. If you use console commands in the first two games to access the fly cam, a fair amount of each deck loads in even if Shepard isn't in the room. Whereas here, loads can happen a split second before you round a corner, or you can get this. Now, this is speculation on my part. I'm not a game developer. I'm just looking at these sorts of things as an outsider with minimal development knowledge. Knowing that Mass Effect 3 came out at the end of the console's lifespan where graphical fidelity was the highest the series had seen, the asset textures can be a major contributor in a game's overall file size. Both 2 and 3 came out on the 360 as 2 discs, but talk around each game's development is rather different, with reports that 2's cycle was far healthier for its staff than 3's, which might explain the difference in loads, why there are less windows, and the cards at the poker table not being actual playing cards, but just the Cerberus documents from the Lazarus Project you can find throughout each version of the SR2, and maybe it's why Shep can't get their drink on. Something I really appreciate is the return of Moodier Lighting. The War Room has this serious vibe, dimly lit and relying on heavy blues much like the original Normandy. In fact, a fair bit of the ship reverts back to this vibe and away from the sterile look Cerberus had installed. And I love this so much. Mass Effect 3 is a dire game, very little goes right, and that atmosphere has invaded the ship. I look at the War Room and its embodiment of the ugly reality Shepard faces. A computer system where armies, fleets, soldiers, scientists, journalists, students, medics, and anyone capable of providing some sort of service to resist the Reapers is boiled down to numbers. This room, this table, and its holographic interface, which is the predominant light source, draws my eye into its cold calculus, never failing to leave me uncomfortable and worried about what the future might hold. While they don't quite make everyone's little nook look like that of Kasumi and Zaid's, many of them are more personalized. There's a few extra knickknacks around the main battery. Liara's room is a real gamer room. That, or she needs all these monitors for her career in the underworld as a purveyor of information. Javik's space isn't as sparse as it was under Grunt. There are mementos he carries as the last remaining Prothean, one of which even comes up in discussion. He also has these tables of black water, which he is deeply staring into and washing his hands in. It's almost like a religious cleansing, though he also remarks about how dirty the ship and its inhabitants are, in the most imperialist way he can. Then there's James Vega's little cove of military muscle-headed bravado down in the cargo hold. Not everyone has a personalized space though. Kaidan is still just kinda hanging out, but at least it's in a spot that fits his story of self-discovery and acceptance a bit better. And Tali, well, she's still in the engine room as always, which makes sense even though her reasons for doing so have changed. no longer seeking information to bring back to the flotilla, but doing what she can as a tech expert to keep the Normandy running. Diana Allers has a lot of empty wine bottles and knocked over wine glasses around. Honestly, the inclusion of this character has always kinda weirded me out. It's certainly odd that an employee of IGN was put into the game, even if they were more of a host than critic or journalist. Though what bothers me more is the weird way gamers would discuss how they were going to sleep with Jessica Chobot. I do think it's interesting that she's an option for both Sheps, and is only a fling, which feels more in line with Andromeda's openness about relationships. When you're walking around, you might also notice there are a lot of empty parts. There isn't the same number of squad mates as in 2. No one is ever in life support or the lower level of engineering. Outside of a brief scene early on, the AI server room where Legion stood is empty. Maybe for some, it's a little disappointing to see space go to waste. For there to be fewer characters to spend time with, these spaces are uncomfortable, but not because a lack of content or any complaint so gamery in nature, but rather because every time I step into them, I am reminded who used to call these places home. Those that have moved on, those that didn't make it. What I really love about this version of the SR2 is that the weight of the trilogy is laid upon it. From the aforementioned war room to the memorial wall with the names of every crew member of each Normandy that has lost their lives. It's impossible not to look at. Every time the elevator doors open up to the crew deck, there it is, a reminder of Shepard's failings as a leader stare right into their soul. As I mentioned, the cargo hold is accessible once more. The area is largely used for item procurement and inventory management, though Mass Effect 3's inventory is not the mess that one's was. Of the 2 squad mates down here, one is a partial party member in the same way the new assistant Samantha Trainer is. Steve Cortez, the dedicated Kodiak pilot, can be seen working on this small craft, while yelling across the room to Vega. This is where Mass Effect 3 really separates itself in making the Normandy a living, breathing home. In 1, the crew hardly interacted with each other on the Normandy outside of cutscenes. Even then, it wasn't much. In 2, non-squad mate crew members start to have little conversations you can check in on every now and again. Still, outside of cutscenes, the main team never really spoke to one another on board. This is no longer the case. Not only will the crew that are in the same room talk, but they'll converse over ship comms. So Garrus, who's in the main battery, can chat Tally up, who is down in engineering. More impressive though is this.
Got the flush. Full house. Got it on the river.
Shit.
Thought you were bluffing on the flush. Good for you.
Cannon, Lieutenant.
Yes, sir, Major Alenko, sir.
Ever since I played Knights of the Old Republic back in junior high, I've been walking around places like the Normandy in a formulaic fashion to wring out whatever conversations I could. With every base, there was a path that I took 99 times out of 100 in order to talk to each and every character. But now there's a wrinkle, a small one, but a distinctly lifelike one. Heading down to the hangar to talk to Vega and not finding him there is odd. A little worrying, honestly, as I thought he might have glitched out into the vast void of the Milky Way. But no, he was in the kitchen, cooking up some huevos rancheros, having an awkward attempt at joking with Javik. There's also this time I went down to engineering to hang out with Tally and couldn't find her. I started thinking, okay, I know they move around the ship. Where could she possibly have gone? I searched each deck until I eventually opened up the door to the main battery and found this.
Oh.
We were just,
I came to say goodbye, and, well...
No longer did characters just wait around to be talked to by the hero of the story. No longer did they just wait to be romanced by them and them alone. All this time, those little conversations Shepard had walked in on, they were building towards something so outside of the predictable, if thoroughly enjoyable BioWare formula as I had engaged with for a decade. Mass Effect is a big series. I don't just mean that in terms of time investment, total assets, or its popularity. I mean in its scope. It's about influential people, history-defining deeds, giant space battles, and galactic extinction. But it's also about the little things. You will spend more time on the Normandy than any other place in the Milky Way, other than maybe the Citadel. If it wasn't given all this loving detail, it wouldn't feel like a cutting-edge battleship going off to save the galaxy. It wouldn't be a good place to walk around for dozens of hours, a place to make friends and watch them grow, to bring comfort, somewhere for Shepard to rest their war-weary head next to the person they love, to reminisce, a place to call home. So here's April's video. Yes, April's video. It's definitely still April. Nothing wrong here. Video editing is troubling and time consuming. And also I need to, eat and stuff. So if you would like me to be able to eat food, you can assist me in that quest over on patreon.com/wordsmaybe. If you're feeling very generous and you want to tell me to watch an anime that you think I'd like and then have me say some words about it in some capacity, you can even give me $5. That would be pretty cool. Joking aside, thank you to everyone who has supported this channel in any way. There was supposed to be a different video coming out today, but yeah, we'll get there eventually. So until then, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.